There's a quote I like from the famous psychologist Viktor Frankl, and it goes like this: "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves."
The creative process is first imagining and then believing the state imagined. Always imagine and expect the best. The world cannot change until you change your conception of it. As within, so without.
Cognitive dissonance. Now that's a word I've thought a lot about in the past few years. And what that word means, of course, cognitive, that means like thinking, mental activity. And then the word dissonance. And then that's the key word here. What that word means is lack of agreement. The dissonance between the truth and what people want to believe. You could describe it as lack of harmony or an inconsistency between the beliefs one holds and their actions. Another way to describe it is the psychological discomfort or tension that arises when a person holds two or more contradictory beliefs, values, or attitudes, especially when their behavior conflicts with those beliefs. Have you ever had something that you just didn't want to be true? There's all kinds of things that we don't want to be true, but we can't get around it. We have to face it. But there are some subjects where we get to decide if we think they're true or not, like religion and politics. Basically, our worldview, how we see the world and reality. We get to decide which political party we want to vote for. We get to decide which religion, if any, that we believe in. And in this day and age, it's the first time in human history, thanks to the internet, that we can research anything or ideology that we want to. Because throughout all of human history, you just had to accept what was told to you. And it was next to impossible to look it up and to see if it was true. But not anymore. So the way I like to think of it is any type of worldview or ideology, I like to think of it as a box of cereal. But not just any cereal, specifically Raisin Bran. If you remember on the commercial, 2 scoops of raisins in every box of Raisin Bran. And I like to think of the raisins as representing things that are true, truth. And the bran flakes would represent the ideology, worldview, or political leanings. And so the question is, how much raisins do you have in your ideological cereal box? How much truth? And the big question, are you willing to turn the box around and to read the ingredients to see what it's made up of and where it came from? Because that's the hard part. And it's hard for me, being a curious guy, to understand why somebody wouldn't want to know where their beliefs came from or ideas. Because for me, this whole mess or liberation started because I kept turning around the back of the cereal box, trying to read the ingredients. I wanted to see what it was made up of and where it came from. And I wasn't doing it to try to disprove it either. I was just curious. And I really wanted to know. And of course, as I've shared in the last 3 Awakening episodes, I was just curious. I really wanted to know and deepen my understanding. But I got way more than I bargained for. And the whole point I'm trying to make here is this day and age, everybody has the ability to turn the ideological cereal box around and read the ingredients. And if you're not, My question is, why not? To me, the very fact that somebody would not be interested in reading the ingredients to their belief systems is because maybe they're scared at what they might find, especially if their finances are somehow tied to their belief system. It would make changing their mind very costly. But what's the choice? I mean, that's where we get the term living a lie from. It's less of a price to live a lie than to face the truth. Well, it depends what perspective you're looking at it from, but that's what people would argue who are in difficult situations. Over the years, I've seen and heard stories of pastors that have some sort of breakdown or epiphany or something, and they leave their church and go get a regular job like the rest of us. Problem is, if they went to Bible college after high school, the only thing they've ever been trained to do is to uphold a belief system. Or should I say, sell it. So that's why, in my experience, a lot of times you'll see ex-pastors as car salesmen, insurance agents, real estate. You get the idea. I know I'm rambling here, but the reason I'm bringing this up is because the world is changing. The government, the political, the religious, and the medical structures are collapsing. And there's millions of people whose paychecks are dependent on those. And I want to recognize that for them to change their minds is extremely costly. I'm self-employed, and I can think anything that I want, and it doesn't affect my job or income at all. So compared to millions of people all over the world whose paychecks are hooked in or connected to these ideological ideas, I have it easy. Now, on the last Awakening episode I did, I ended it with the fact that the universe was revealing to me the reality of aliens, and that things are way more stranger than I had ever realized. That was a very exciting and just eerie time for me. I remember telling somebody once that we can't vote on what reality is, but if we could, I would vote for God, Jesus, Holy Spirit, angels, and devil. I'm comfortable with that. But what do you do when the universe is making it clear to you that that's just not the case? At that point on my journey, there was just no turning back. It really did feel like I was in some sort of training course. I would hear stuff in my sleep 4 or 5 nights a week, and that would cause me to research new subjects. And many times I would get to the point where I think I have finally learned everything, that there can't be possibly anything else that I need to learn, that I have exhausted this subject. And then I'd be on to a new idea, discovering the truth about something else. It all started with the giants. Time warps may be real. Quantum computers contact other dimensions. The Bible has been severely mistranslated, and that the true teachings of Jesus were hijacked by the Roman government. I mean, there are some reasons in there, if you know what I mean, but it's mostly bran flakes. And now, it was time for aliens. The one subject I didn't want to face. The cereal box I did not want to turn around. But the universe was telling me that I had to. In fact, it was turning the box around for me. And in the cereal box of aliens, there is way more raisins than I had thought. So I started buying books and just listening to any podcast that I could find. And I started to notice a pattern. As I listened to story after story from people who have had contact and even been abducted by aliens, I noticed that the pattern was these were positive experiences that changed their life for the better. Yeah, they had the crap scared out of them at the time, but looking back, it was not traumatic. In fact, I ended up discovering that somewhere around 80 to 90% of the cases of people being contacted or abducted by aliens are positive. And that was shocking to me because that was not the idea that I had in my mind. You can think of all of the alien movies that are out there that the aliens are negative and they're trying to destroy Earth and Earth has to fight them off somehow. But there is one movie where the aliens are positive. Actually, two movies. Close Encounters of a Third Kind and E.T., both done by Spielberg. And as far as a Close Encounters goes, the rumor has it is that he was seeded information that's true from the government for that movie. So let's think about that here. The one alien movie that's rumored to have information in it seeded from the government is one of the only positive alien movies that I can think of. That's interesting. And as I began to open up my mind, I discovered that the government clearly knows about aliens, and it probably always has, and that our religions are really just cargo cults. And we get the term cargo cult from World War II. All of the islands that are scattered throughout the Pacific around Japan, they had natives or aboriginals that had lived on them for hundreds or thousands of years. And when they would see these American warplanes dropping food from the skies and supplies, they thought they were gods. And they worshiped them because they had no contextual framework in their minds or worldview that they would be anything other than gods. And they found after the war that they had built air traffic control towers out of bamboo, and they were trying to get them to come back. You can take a lot of religions, Christianity included, and when you begin to look at it like that, from that point of view, it has a real different feel to it. A quick example is the prophet Elijah, the famous story that he was taken to heaven on what? A chariot, that he rode in a chariot to heaven. Well, he rode in something to heaven. I wonder how many words back then they would have had to get into an object and fly away. Probably none. What would they have called a saucer-type ship that Elijah got in? Probably call it something like a chariot. And back then, if you think about it, it's kind of funny. What was a chariot a few thousand years ago? It was military technology. So it's kind of funny. They said that he rode in military technology to another dimension. Maybe that's a bit of a stretch. I don't know. Maybe not. But man, that was a strange and a bit creepy time for me to begin to look at the Bible from a different perspective like that. There's a guy from Australia named Paul Wallace, and he was a theologian in the Anglican Church for 33 years. And he's got a lot of great books that just explore that idea. I have to say, it kind of makes sense. But one thing I started to notice as I opened up my mind to aliens and stopped being afraid, I noticed something was happening. I was hearing that voice in the night a lot less. It was kind of a bummer, really. I was wondering if I was doing something wrong. It went from 4 or 5 times a week for maybe close to 2 years, then down to a couple times a week, then to once a week, and now it might be a handful of times a month. Looking back on it, it kind of reminds me of a show you're watching, and you're gonna watch a new season, but before they start off that new season, they have a quick recap of the last season, and it kind of felt like that's what I was on. I was just getting a recap on everything I had missed to kind of get me up to speed. And for me, everything really clicked when I found Chris Bledsoe. I did episode 4 called The Message of Chris Bledsoe. For me, he was the perfect mix. He was a longtime Christian. He was a carpenter like me. And also like me, he had Crohn's disease. And I had suffered with it for 13 years. I was in a continual flare-up. And of course, if you've listened to that episode, you would know that his message from the aliens or phenomena or the lady, as he calls it, it's a message of love and hope and peace for humanity. And I really vibed with him. And then I discovered that his son, Ryan Bledsoe, has a podcast called Bledsoe Said So. And on that podcast, you get to know Chris and really their whole family. They do not have a message of fear, but it's of hope. So this will be the last episode that I do on my awakening. It's not because I'm all done. I think I'm just getting started, really. But that's the process that happened to get me to be kind of up to speed. So I've read the back of the ideological cereal box. I'm caught up, kind of, on the last season of human history, so to speak. And I'm ready for what's going to unfold in front of us right now. So how about you? Are you ready? I assume if you're listening to this, that you're probably on the same journey as me, because why else would you click on a podcast called the Gnostic Astronauts Podcast, or listen to anything with the title Thought Tub Revelations? And the fact that you've made it here in the podcast, really, it means you're weird too. There's a guy named Robert Monroe. He started something called the Monroe Institute. And long story short, they are experts in remote viewing. They have worked with the government in the past, and they're experts in astral projecting, and it's a whole rabbit hole to go down. But Robert Monroe has talked about how that there are ships gathering around our planet to watch what they call the Big Show. As humanity wakes up and we, I guess, graduate to higher levels of conscious evolution, that they're watching and even participating in it. The truth is, Star Trek and Star Wars, I'm sure, are a more accurate representation of reality than what we've been told. So the big question is, what's next? Well, I think things are going to get way more stranger than they are now. Every month, the intensity dial is getting turned up a notch. And maybe I'll end this awakening series with a powerful dream that I had. This was October 26, 2023. And at this point, I was comfortable with the alien idea. I was seeing the religion and just what exactly the Bible is in a new light. And I was beginning to see some of the old heroes I had within Christianity in a new light. And it was weird to listen to them speak and think, wow, they're wrong. That I totally have a new perspective on it. And I can see how they just have blinders on. It was very strange. And then one night I had a dream. And in that dream, I was at the flour mill that I do a lot of work at. and I looked up into the sky, and I could see a highway of spaceships just moving fast. They look a lot like Star Wars spaceships, really cool looking, and they were just flying. And then I looked off to the right, and I saw a huge cargo plane built out of like twigs or toothpicks or something. And then I saw the plane's wing, the right wing, break off. And as it broke off, a man either jumped or fell. And this man was wearing a suit, and he was falling head first towards the ground. And as he was falling, his eyes were looking directly at me. He was screaming like he had gone mad, and his eyes were completely bulged out of his head. And then that guy hit the ground with one of the most sickening thuds I had ever heard in my life. In fact, that sickening thud vibrated through my whole being. And I had the thought in my head, why did I have to see that? I wish that I never saw that. And then I looked, and I saw a woman, and she was not falling, but she was descending kind of on an angle, and her eyes were staring directly at me, very intent. And she crashed into a part of the flour mill that we call the cleaning house. And in that cleaning house is a huge sifter for sifting the seeds and separating them from the garbage, the chaff. And as she crashed through the wall of the cleaning house, I knew that I had to go in and see if she was okay. And so I pulled the key out of my pocket, and I began to put it in the doorknob and open the door handle, and I was worried with what I might find. Now, I know somebody tells me a dream that happened to them. It's never anywhere near as powerful as when it happens to you. But this dream, when I woke up, I felt something in the room. It was probably the most powerful dream I've ever had in my life, and I felt disturbed for a couple days. And as I've meditated on this for well over a year now, I know what it means. That plane built out of twigs or sticks is our government, authoritarian institutions. And that man in the suit, it represents the negative masculine that has been ruling and destroying the earth. And the suit represents, well, just think about it. Who wears suits? Politicians, the government, bankers, our financial institutions, and religious leaders. And all three of those are going to come crashing to the ground with a sickening thud. And really, that's what we're watching right now. The amount of wars that are going on around the world and live stream genocides definitely match up with the sickening feeling I had in the dream. The thought of, why did I have to see that? And the woman that I saw in the dream descending on an angle, intently staring at me and going through the cleaning house wall. Well, it's been made clear to me that woman represents divine feminine. And her crashing into the cleaning house where the sifter is. Of course, the sifter is pretty self-explanatory, separating the seed from the chaff. And to put it all in a nutshell, divine feminine is cleaning house, that she is sifting humanity. And to me, that ties in with what the lady told Chris Bledsoe. The divine feminine is returning to earth. And maybe even next year, the things are going to be rocky and intense. and then we'll have 1,000 years of peace. It also goes with what Vrillon from the Ashtar Galactic Command told the people in England when they hijacked the television station, that the age of Aquarius is coming, and that we have the opportunity to get rid of our weapons of war and exchange them for peace. It reminds me of Terence McKenna's time wave zero theory, where novelty is going to increase until humanity breaks through into another dimension. And I guess that's the big show that Robert Monroe talked about. And we're all a part of it. And I admit, talking about all this stuff, especially if somebody's hearing it for the first time, it would sound terrible. But I like to explain it this way. Now, we just went through a worldwide pandemic a few years ago. And it was not good. I know people who died and who lost their businesses. I also know people who did extremely well. In fact, a lot of my podcast heroes started their podcast over the pandemic because they were bored and had nothing to do, and now they're living the life of their dreams. There were people that made millions and millions of dollars during the pandemic just because the markets changed. But for me and my family, I have to say, overall, we had a pretty good pandemic. And I like to think that way with the end of the age, Armageddon. I don't know about you, but I'm planning on having a great Armageddon. I'm going to do my best not to resist change and open-mindedness. I'm going to do everything I can to let go of things that aren't serving me. I'm going to resist giving into fear and know that there is nothing to fear except fear itself. Because really, there are only two options anyways. We can surf the time wave, or we can be crushed by it.